The strange thing about power is that most people have no idea what it looks like when it shows up. Sometimes it arrives in a black SUV with tinted windows and a driver in a suit. And sometimes it pulls up to a locked gate in a 10-year-old pickup truck with dust on the tailgate and a coffee cup rattling in the cup holder. That morning outside Fort Worth, nobody at Redstone Airfield understood that yet, especially the guy guarding the gate. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet in that way small private airports tend to be. Not silent exactly, because somewhere in the distance a turboprop was coughing to life, and a line crew guy was dragging a fuel hose across the concrete, but calm enough that you could hear birds sitting on the hangar roofs. Redstone wasn't a big commercial airport. No terminals full of passengers, no security lines, none of that. It was a private field. Mostly corporate jets, charter operations, a few wealthy owners who kept their aircraft in polished hangars that smelled like fresh epoxy and jet fuel. The kind of place where everybody usually knows everybody. Or at least they think they do. The front gate sat about a quarter-mile off the county road, tucked behind a long stretch of fencing and a little guard booth that looked like it had been there since the 90s. Inside that booth sat a guy named Tyler Briggs. Tyler was 27, tall, lean, and the kind of guy who still wore his high school football jacket sometimes when the weather dipped below 60. 6 months earlier, he'd taken the security job after a short stint bouncing around construction sites. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid steady, and Tyler liked the idea of being in charge of something. The gate, in his mind, was his territory. You wanted in, you went through him. That morning he had one elbow resting on the window ledge of the booth, scrolling through his phone, half listening to the radio chatter coming from the operations tower. A charter delegation was already inside the property, waiting at Hangar 3. 5 executives from a regional jet company who were apparently negotiating a long-term lease. Tyler had heard about them earlier from the operations manager, a guy named Rick who always walked fast and talked faster. Important meeting today, Rick had said. Don't let anyone through who isn't cleared. Tyler took that instruction seriously. Maybe a little too seriously. Around 9:15 a.m. vehicle rolled slowly up the gravel drive toward the gate. Tyler glanced up. It wasn't what he expected. No black SUV. No town car. Just an old silver pickup, the kind ranchers drove out here. A little faded along the doors, a few scratches along the tailgate. The engine idled softly as it stopped at the barrier arm. Behind the wheel sat a woman. She looked maybe early 40s, maybe a little older, hard to tell because her face had that calm, unbothered expression some people carry like armor. She wore a brown leather flight jacket over a gray shirt, blue jeans, hair pulled back in a loose braid. No jewelry that Tyler could see. No badge clipped anywhere obvious. No driver waiting in the passenger seat. Just her. Tyler leaned out of the booth window. "Morning," he said, already halfway bored with the interaction. The woman gave a small nod. "Morning. I'm here for a meeting in Hangar 3. Her voice was steady, relaxed. The kind of voice that didn't rush. Tyler glanced at the access monitor inside the booth. Nothing. No scheduled arrival under her license plate. No vehicle tag registered. He shrugged. "Do you have a gate clearance?" She reached toward the center console of the truck. "Should be in the system under." Tyler held up a hand. "If it's not in the system, I can't open the gate." She paused, hand still resting near the console. Then she looked back up at him, not irritated exactly, just patient. "Well, could you check with the operations office? They're expecting me." Tyler felt something tighten in his chest. It was a familiar feeling. That little instinct people sometimes get when they think someone's trying to talk their way around the rules. He shook his head. "This is a restricted facility, ma'am. Tenants schedule access ahead of time." Her expression didn't change. "I understand that." "Then you understand I can't let you through." A breeze rolled across the pavement, pushing the smell of fuel and warm asphalt through the open booth window. The woman studied Tyler for a moment, like she was measuring the distance between patience and annoyance. Then she said calmly, "I'm happy to wait while you verify." Tyler leaned back in his chair. "I don't need to call anyone." The words came out louder than he expected. One of the line crew guys across the ramp glanced over. Tyler continued, voice carrying now. "Real tenants book their access in advance. Maybe you've got the wrong airport." The woman's eyebrow lifted slightly. Not angry, just curious, like she was seeing something unfold that she'd seen before. Inside the truck, resting on the dashboard, was a dark red badge clipped to a lanyard. Tyler noticed her hand move toward it. He immediately stiffened. Whoa, don't pull anything out. She stopped. Just a badge. Stay in the vehicle. His tone had shifted now. More authority, more edge. He reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. Hey, Mike. He called toward the second guard who was walking across the lot. Might need county out here. The other guard slowed, confused. Tyler stepped out from the booth and walked toward the barrier arm. He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the pickup's license plate. The click of the camera sounded louder than it should have in the quiet morning air. He spoke loudly, almost like he was narrating the situation. Unauthorized individual attempting to access restricted property. Logging the plate now. What Tyler didn't notice was that his radio channel was still open, and every word he was saying was drifting straight through the Airfield communications system. Inside Hangar 3, 5 executives standing near a polished Gulfstream jet suddenly heard the conversation echo through a speaker mounted high on the wall. One of them turned. Did you guys hear that? Another executive walked toward the open hangar door, curious. Back at the gate, Tyler pointed down the gravel drive. I'm going to need you to turn around and leave the property. The woman in the truck looked at him quietly for a moment. Then she leaned back in her seat and waited. Tyler crossed his arms. The silence stretched. Then, across the entire airfield, the public address system crackled to life. And a voice from the control tower said something that would stop every moving person on that property in their tracks. But that part of the story is where things really start getting interesting. The first thing you have to understand about small private airfields is that the radio system connects everything. The tower, the hangars, the fuel trucks, the maintenance crews, sometimes even the security booth if someone forgets to switch channels. That morning, Tyler Briggs had absolutely forgotten. So when the public address system crackled across Redstone Airfield, the sound echoed through every open hangar door and across the entire ramp. The voice that came through belonged to the tower supervisor, a woman named Carol Henson, who had worked air traffic control long enough to develop a tone that could stop people mid-sentence. Calm, direct, not the kind of voice that wasted words. Attention all personnel, she said. The static faded and the message carried clearly across the property. Security at the front gate. Confirm vehicle entry immediately. There was a brief pause. Then she continued. The individual currently waiting at the gate is Evelyn Carter. Another pause. Inside Hangar 3, one of the executives frowned. Who? Carol's voice returned, steady as ever. Ms. Carter is the majority partner of Redstone Aviation Group. She holds controlling ownership of this airfield. The words drifted across the ramp like a slow shockwave. 72% ownership, Carol added. Acquired last year through Carter Industrial Holdings. Then came the line that would live in Tyler Briggs' memory for the rest of his life. Open the gate immediately. Silence followed. Not the normal quiet of an airport morning. This was a different kind of silence. The kind that happens when 100 people suddenly realize something has gone very, very wrong. Out on the ramp, the line crew guys stopped rolling the fuel cart. In the maintenance bay, someone shut off a drill. Even the executives at Hangar 3 looked at each other with raised eyebrows. Back at the gate, Tyler blinked. Once. Then again. For a moment, his brain simply refused to process the information. Majority partner? Owner? That didn't line up with what he was seeing. Because the woman sitting in the pickup truck looked normal. No security detail. No expensive car. No one calling ahead. Just a woman in a worn leather jacket with a calm look on her face. Tyler cleared his throat and grabbed the radio. Tower, this is gate security, he said, suddenly aware that his voice sounded a little thin. You said? Carter. Carol didn't hesitate. Yes. Another beat passed. Open the gate. Tyler felt heat rush into his face. Behind him, the second guard Mike had stopped walking and was now staring at Tyler like someone watching a slow-motion train wreck. Inside the truck, Evelyn Carter hadn't moved. She was still sitting there quietly, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. Watching. Not angry. Not smug. Just waiting. Tyler lowered the radio slowly. For a second, he considered pretending he hadn't heard the message clearly. But that option disappeared quickly when he noticed something else. Across the ramp, several people had stepped outside their hangars, and they were all looking toward the gate. Even worse, someone near Hangar 3 had a phone pointed in their direction. Recording. Tyler felt his stomach drop. He suddenly remembered every word he'd said out loud 5 minutes earlier. Unauthorized individual. Wrong airport. Maybe you're confused. The memory hit him like a bucket of cold water. He turned back toward the truck. Evelyn was still watching him with the same quiet expression. Tyler walked to the control panel beside the booth and pressed the gate release button. The barrier arm lifted slowly with a mechanical hum that sounded embarrassingly loud in the morning air. He swallowed. The words tangled together. I didn't realize. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. That was it. No anger. No lecture. Just a small motion that somehow made Tyler feel even worse. That's all right, she said calmly. Then she put the truck in gear and rolled forward. As she passed the booth, she lowered her window. For a brief moment, Tyler thought she might say something harsh. Instead, she looked directly at him. Up close, her eyes were steady and thoughtful, the kind of eyes that had spent years watching people reveal who they really were. You're new here, aren't you? She asked. Tyler nodded automatically. 6 months. She gave a small nod. Figured. Then she drove through the gate and continued down the long access road toward the hangars. Tyler stood there frozen as the truck disappeared down the pavement. Behind him, Mike let out a long breath. Man, he muttered. Tyler rubbed his face with both hands. He could feel every pair of eyes on the property pointed in his direction. Across the airfield, Evelyn parked near Hangar 3. The executives waiting there had clearly heard everything through the radio system. One of them was still holding his phone. Another was trying unsuccessfully not to smile. When Evelyn stepped out of the truck, the group straightened. Their leader, a tall man in a Navy suit named Daniel Reeves, walked forward with an easy handshake. Ms. Carter, he said. Good to finally meet you in person. She shook his hand. Evelyn is fine. Daniel glanced briefly toward the distant gate. Interesting entrance. Evelyn smiled slightly. Security's doing their job. The executives exchanged a quick look. Inside the hangar, a long table had been set up with folders, coffee, and a set of preliminary lease documents. The meeting they were about to have involved a multi-year aircraft storage contract. Not a small deal. If it went through, it would bring in nearly $2 million annually for Redstone Airfield. Evelyn walked with them toward the table. But before she sat down, she paused near the open hangar door and looked back across the field toward the gate. From that distance, the security booth looked tiny. She could see Tyler standing outside it, still talking to the other guard. For a moment, she said nothing. Daniel followed her gaze. Everything all right? Evelyn exhaled softly. Yeah. Then she said something that surprised him. Just thinking. About what? She leaned one shoulder against the hangar door frame. About how quickly people decide who belongs somewhere. Daniel chuckled lightly. Private aviation can be a little particular about appearances. Evelyn nodded slowly. Oh, I know. What Daniel didn't know, what almost nobody at Redstone knew yet, was that Evelyn Carter had spent the first 30 years of her life being underestimated. Not because she lacked skill, not because she lacked intelligence, but because she didn't look like the kind of person people expected to run aviation companies. Her father had been a crop duster pilot in Oklahoma. Her first office had been a folding chair in a dusty hangar while she learned aircraft maintenance from mechanics twice her age. And for years, she'd watched people glance at her work boots and assume she was someone's assistant, or someone's daughter, or someone who had wandered into the wrong room. Eventually, she stopped correcting people right away. Instead, she let them show her exactly who they were. Moments like the one at the gate, they weren't new to her, but they were always revealing. Behind her, Daniel cleared his throat. Well, he said, gesturing toward the table. Should we take a look at these numbers? Evelyn turned back toward the meeting. Let's do it. The negotiation lasted nearly an hour. It was straightforward business. Hangar space, maintenance access, fuel pricing, scheduling. By the end of it, the executives looked satisfied. Daniel slid the final document across the table. 18-month term to start, he said. Just under $2 million annually. Evelyn picked up a pen. But before she signed, Rick, the operations manager, suddenly jogged into the hangar, looking slightly breathless. Evelyn, he said quietly. Can I talk to you for a second? She stepped aside with him. Rick lowered his voice. About the gate incident earlier. Evelyn waited. Rick rubbed the back of his neck. Security company already called. They're reviewing it. Evelyn didn't seem surprised. Rick continued. Tyler, the guard, he's been suspended pending investigation. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she glanced once more toward the gate. Rick misread her silence. If you want him removed permanently, we can make that happen today. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked one simple question. What exactly did he say? Rick hesitated. Well, the radio recording caught most of it. He shifted awkwardly. Let's just say he assumed you didn't belong here. Evelyn looked out toward the runway where a small jet was taxiing slowly in the distance. Then she nodded once. All right. Rick waited. So, what do you want to do about him? Evelyn turned back toward the table where the executives were waiting with polite curiosity. She picked up the pen again. Let's finish the contract first. She signed her name slowly across the final page. A clean, confident signature. Then she closed the folder. The deal was done, but the story of what happened at that gate wasn't finished yet. Because sometimes the real moment of truth doesn't come when someone makes a mistake. It comes when the person with power decides what to do next. And Evelyn Carter hadn't made that decision yet. By the time the meeting wrapped up, the sun had climbed higher over Redstone Airfield, and the quiet Tuesday morning had turned into the usual midday rhythm. Fuel trucks rolled slowly across the ramp. A Citation jet taxied past Hangar 3 with that soft whistling sound small jets make when they idle. And inside the operations office, people were whispering. Because news travels faster than airplanes in places like this. Everyone had heard about the gate. Everyone had heard the radio message. And more than a few people had seen the short clip someone recorded on a phone, the one showing Tyler Briggs standing stiffly beside the booth while the tower announcement echoed across the property. Nobody was saying much out loud, but the question was floating around every hangar and maintenance bay. What was Evelyn Carter going to do about it? Inside Hangar 3, the executives from Horizon Charter were packing up their folders and shaking hands. Daniel Reeves gave Evelyn a satisfied nod. Well, he said, tapping the signed contract lightly. Looks like we'll be neighbors for a while. Evelyn smiled. Looking forward to it. Another executive chuckled and glanced toward the runway. I have to admit, he said, that entrance earlier might be the most memorable arrival I've seen at a private airfield. A couple of the others laughed. Evelyn did too, though it was a quieter kind of laugh. Wasn't exactly planned, she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You handled it pretty calmly. Evelyn shrugged slightly. When you spend enough years in aviation, you learn something about people. And what's that? She paused for a moment before answering. That they usually show you who they are within the first 30 seconds. The group seemed to think about that. Then Daniel gave a small nod. Well, if the rest of our partnership is as interesting as the first 5 minutes, we'll get along just fine. They said their goodbyes, and the executives headed toward their waiting car. Rick, the operations manager, lingered behind near the hangar door. He cleared his throat once they were alone. So, about this morning. Evelyn leaned back against the table. Yeah. Rick rubbed his hands together nervously. I talked to the security company again. They're expecting a decision. Evelyn tilted her head. What kind of decision? You know, whether Tyler stays or goes. Rick glanced down at the floor briefly. They're assuming you'll want him gone. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her coffee and took a slow sip. Out on the runway, a King Air lifted off the ground, engines rising into a distant roar before fading again. Finally, she set the cup down. Where is he now? Rick looked a little surprised. In the office. They pulled his badge this morning. Has anyone talked to him? Rick shook his head. Not really. He's just been sitting there waiting. Evelyn pushed away from the table. Well, let's not keep him waiting all day. Rick blinked. You want to talk to him? Seems fair. They walked across the ramp together toward the small operations building near the gate. As they approached, a few employees suddenly found very interesting reasons to stare at toolboxes or fuel carts. Curiosity hung in the air like humidity. Inside the office, Tyler Briggs sat in a chair near the wall. Without his security badge, he looked younger somehow. Less like the confident gate guard from earlier, and more like a guy who suddenly realized the ground beneath his feet wasn't as solid as he thought. When Evelyn walked through the door, he stood up immediately. His posture was stiff, awkward, like someone waiting for a verdict. Rick hovered near the doorway. Tyler cleared his throat. Ma'am. Evelyn held up a hand gently. Evelyn is fine. He nodded. Right? Evelyn. There was a long pause. Tyler looked like he was trying to find the exact words that might somehow rewind the last 3 hours. Eventually, he just exhaled. I owe you an apology. His voice was rough but sincere. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Evelyn studied him quietly. Tyler continued. I made an assumption, and I was wrong. He glanced briefly toward the floor. I get it if I'm fired. The room stayed silent for a few seconds. Rick shifted his weight, clearly expecting Evelyn to confirm that outcome. Instead, she asked Tyler a question. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? Tyler hesitated. It would have been easy to dodge the question, to say something vague about procedures or confusion. But something about Evelyn's calm expression made that feel pointless. So he told the truth. You didn't look like the people who usually come through that gate. Evelyn nodded slowly. That's honest. Tyler swallowed. Still wrong. Yeah, she said gently. It was. Another pause settled over the room. Then Evelyn leaned against the desk. Let me ask you something else. Tyler looked up. If someone actually didn't belong here, how should security handle it? Tyler answered immediately. Professionally. Meaning, verify first. Call the office if there's any doubt. Evelyn nodded again. That sounds reasonable. Rick crossed his arms quietly, still unsure where this conversation was heading. Evelyn took a breath. You know something interesting about aviation, Tyler? He shook his head. In this industry, she said, a lot of the most important people look like mechanics or farmers or folks driving old trucks. She gave a small smile. Because many of them started exactly that way. Tyler managed a faint, embarrassed laugh. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. Evelyn straightened slightly. The real problem this morning wasn't that you stopped me at the gate. Tyler frowned a little. It wasn't. No. She gestured toward the window where the runway stretched into the distance. Security should stop anyone who isn't confirmed. That part of your job was correct. Rick blinked in surprise. Evelyn continued. The problem was how quickly you decided who I was before you had the information. Tyler nodded slowly. That's fair. The tension in the room softened just a little. Then Evelyn said something no one expected. So here's what I'm thinking. Rick leaned forward slightly. Tyler held his breath. Evelyn crossed her arms thoughtfully. You're not fired. Tyler's head snapped up. Rick's eyebrows practically hit the ceiling. Evelyn continued calmly. But things are going to change. Tyler nodded quickly. Anything. You're going to go through additional training with operations. Done. And for the next month, she added, you'll spend part of your shift working inside the hangars with the maintenance crews. Tyler looked confused. Why? Evelyn smiled faintly. Because the more people you meet in this industry, the harder it becomes to judge them by the truck they drive. Tyler thought about that. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, that makes sense. Rick finally spoke. So he keeps the job? Evelyn looked at Tyler one more time. Everyone deserves one mistake. Tyler straightened his shoulders. Thank you. But Evelyn held up a finger. Don't thank me yet. Tyler froze again. She tilted her head slightly. That same curious look from earlier returning. There's one more thing. What's that? Evelyn's voice softened just a bit. Next time someone pulls up to that gate, treat them like they might own the place. A small smile spread across Tyler's face despite himself. I think I can do that. The tension in the room finally broke. Rick let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. Outside, the airfield kept moving. Another plane landed. Another truck rolled through the gate. Life at Redstone continued exactly like it always did. But for Tyler Briggs, and maybe a few other people who heard the story later, something had shifted. Because sometimes the most valuable lesson in a place full of million-dollar airplanes is remembering that respect doesn't cost a thing. Now I'm curious what you think. Did Evelyn make the right call by giving Tyler another chance? Or should someone who judged that quickly have lost the job right there on the spot? Drop your opinion in the comments, because stories like this always divide people. And honestly, that conversation might be just as interesting as what happened at the gate that morning.